Tickety boo, or not so Pukka. I create these videos to enable you to understand all about narcissism, to enable you to understand your part in all of this, why you are chosen, why you react the way that you do, the steps that you can take to protect yourself. I explain to you the various manipulations we use, how they manifest, why we use them, why some narcissists use them extensively, particular manipulations, and why certain narcissists won't use particular manipulations or only do so sparingly. I tell you all about you as the victims. I tell you all about us. I tell you all about the dynamic, the addiction, the emotional thinking, the prime aims. And I also provide information to help you understand about me, the way that I think, the way that I behave, and also how I became what I am. And this particular video gives you a glimpse into an aspect of my childhood. Tickety boo, or not so Pukka, explains part of what created me with regard to becoming the ultra. It gives you background to part of my life, but more importantly, enables you to understand the environment that I grew up in, to enable you to understand part of how that impacted on me, both in terms of a lack of control environment, but also as I began to see what was occurring and how, given that I am the ultra, I harness that to my advantage. A couple of years ago, I had occasion to be in Scotland, a marvellous country, filled with beautiful scenery and plenty of history. At the time, I realised that I was actually fairly near to a place where I had spent a handful of childhood holidays, and I therefore decided to drive to the same location to ascertain if it remained as I remembered it. I found the estate with ease, and followed the single-track road, trying to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that I might recall from the visits here. It was as I turned from the track onto a driveway that I knew I had found the correct place. I halted my vehicle and stared down the driveway. It was lined with scores of cherry trees which were in full blossom. I recalled the first time that I saw this drive, and recalled how I was fascinated by the vibrancy of the pink blossom, and how this blossom rained down upon us as my father drove us along the driveway, the breeze displacing the blossom and causing it to cascade over us like some kind of victory parade. It was quite the picture, and something that I have always recalled, although not as much as what came next on the first time that we journeyed down that road. We had spent a week staying at a 5-star hotel, approximately an hour's drive away from where we had now come to. This was at the insistence of my mother, who had declared, "If I am to rough it, then I want my luxury either side of it." Typically, a cold fury ensued from her, until my father, as ever, conceded and agreed that we would stay a week before and 4 days afterwards at the sumptuous hotel. He preferred the simpler things in life. The place that we were now headed to was an estate that was owned by a friend of my father. They had been in the Royal Air Force together, and Geraint, his friend, had removed himself to Scotland to oversee this estate. My mother had said nothing at all from the moment that we had checked out from the hotel that morning. The move from sumptuous 5-star hotel to what she saw as the equivalent of becoming a peasant on the estate of the Lord had It wounded her, and of course, this caused her to need to punish my father. She sat, her icy rage chilling the interior of the car, as my father drove us all to the estate. My sister babbled incessantly during the journey, commenting on everything that we passed in order to fill the silence. My father concentrated on the road ahead, now being well used to these frozen car journeys, and doubtless wondering how my mother would continue to behave once we arrived. I knew exactly what she would do, and I could see my reflection as I looked out of the window of the car and grinned with anticipation at what would come next. Our car slowly drove along this bright pink tunnel until we halted by a gate. Set on a hillock to the right was a large and impressive house from which a figure, who I assumed was Geraint, walked in a manner which was half walk and half jig. His red corduroy pants housed two legs which skipped across the carefully manicured lawn that embraced the hillock, the colour contrasting with the mustard of his jumper and the green of the shirt beneath. He was as colourful as the entrance to his estate. My father lowered the window as Geraint neared and bellowed into the car. "Hello, hello! Well, how are you all, you wonderful people? Tickety-boo or not so Pukka?" The rear of the car exploded into laughter at this expression. We had not heard anything like it, and coupled with this multicoloured man who bore a huge grin on his face, my sister and brother were mightily amused. I quickly followed suit. This became the mantra for the week, as my siblings and I would ask one another at any opportunity whether he or she was tickety-boo or not so Pukka. Still laughing, I watched as my mother leant towards my father's side of the car and trilled, "Geraint, how positively marvellous to see you! You look excellent well. I must say we are so looking forward to staying with you this week. It's awfully kind of you to accommodate us. It looks glorious. Tell me, how is your wife?" I smirked to myself, as what I came to know as the facade was rolled out by matriarch. I glanced at the rear-view mirror to see my father's reaction. As I suspected, it was one of relief that his wife was now behaving herself. We had been housed in a large cottage for the week, and the cottage was clearly one which belonged to somebody who had worked the estate in the past. A successful farmer or woodsman, perhaps. Geraint occupied the main house where we dined 3 times, if I remember correctly, and there were 15 cottages scattered across the estate. I made it my business to locate them all and draw a map. We spent our days locating them and adding them to the map that we made of the extensive estate. My mother alternated between being fragrant and charming whenever she met Geraint and his family, tickety-boo, to then sitting in silence when consigned to the cottage, not so Pukka. As usual, my father flapped about her, trying to extol the virtue of the cottage and its simpler way of life. The cottage had a permanent musty smell, and it was necessary to chop logs outside to burn in the fireplaces and place in the Arga range to provide cooking and heating facilities. My siblings and I found this endeavour interesting to the usual conveniences that we enjoyed at home, but my mother certainly did not. She passed no adverse comment. She didn't need to, as she had repeatedly berated my father when at the hotel about his choice in coming to stay in this bloody medieval hovel. And it seemed to me that the lap of luxury which she had insisted on had been not so Pukka for her, since she spent all of her time slating my father for wanting to see his old Royal Air Force pal. The blaming and name-calling then gave way to her iciness. I do not recall my mother speaking to my father, save when we were in the presence of Geraint and his family, when my mother became charm personified, complimentary, and quite the attraction of the dinner table. Yet this trip stuck in my memory for many reasons, but most of all for my exposure to the phrase tickety-boo or not so Pukka. I observed how these polar states were played out by my mother as part of her manipulation of my father, her quite amazing vacillation between delightful charm and muted resentment. She shone and then iced over. I have come to realize that this somewhat entertaining phrase is entirely apt for our kind. In our world, everything is either tickety-boo, wonderful, marvellous, and golden, or it is not so Pukka, awful, horrible, terrible, and cruel. There is never any middle ground, no neutral. We don't do mediocre or mundane. We either give you tickety-boo or subject you to not so Pukka.